Baseball opens for business this week. Pitchers and catchers are headed to camp, and owners are headed to Sportfolio.
Absolutely, Rick. We're right on schedule.
Mark Atanasio of the Brewers has reason to be bullish, while the situation for the Dodgers and Mets ownership is kind of a bear.
If $20 million is the entry fee, some people are going to be willing to pay that.
Plus, which baseball teams got the most bang for their free agent buck? And where might Linsanity lead for the NBA? Follow us to the answers on Sportfolio. Hello, I'm Rick Horrow, and welcome to Sportfolio, Bloomberg's inside look at the business of sports. This weekend, pitchers and catchers report to spring training, and every team feels like it's got a legitimate shot at winning the World Series. Of course, the Mets and Dodgers aren't looking that far ahead. We'll discuss their more immediate concerns with lawyer and professor Ken Shropshire. But there are owners who have every reason to look forward to the season, and one of them is Mark Atanasio, the defending National League Central champion Milwaukee Brewers. He joins us from Los Angeles. Mark, your 7th year as an owner. Brewers won their first division title since 1982, and I'm sure when you took over the team, you wrote up a business plan. Did it say division title year 7?
Absolutely, Rick. And we're right on schedule.
Yeah, well, you've been an investment manager as well as baseball owner, so I'm sure you thought long and hard about investing to keep Prince Fielder in Milwaukee. He's stayed on the market a lot longer than Scott Boras expected. Did you ever think about coming in with that one big, dramatic offer to bring him back?
Sure. We looked at that at several points, and in fact, when we made our first serious offer to him a couple of years ago, we stretched as far as we could stretch at that point to try to keep Prince in Milwaukee. He's one-of-a-kind player, and I think, frankly, the contract he got from the Detroit Tigers demonstrates that.
And last year, he had an $85 million payroll on opening day and then about $95 million at the end of the season. And the Cardinals won the World Series in 2011 with a payroll of about $105 million. Are you going to be in that territory this season?
Right now, Rick, it looks like we actually are in that territory. What happens in baseball with the arbitration system and as contracts escalate, your payroll goes up. So our payroll actually, without Prince, pretty much matched what it was last year with Prince before we signed Aramis Ramirez and Alex Gonzalez and brought K-Rod back. So add those to last year's payroll and you've got this year's payroll.
Off the field in a minute, but on the field, what is your strategy about getting the most out of the least, given your market?
7 years ago, we made a pledge to our fans to always remain competitive. So, it starts there. And we've been very fortunate. We haven't had to be in a position to rebuild yet. We've only been building. And so we do what we can within the parameters of our payroll to put as good a team as we can on the field. One of the challenges in baseball is you not only need 25 guys. When you look at the course of a season, you probably need 35 guys in order to win. So one player it may tip the scales or the balance at one point in the season, but no one player is going to get you to the World Series necessarily. And ultimately, that's where we had to make a decision on Prince. Because if we had signed Prince, we would not have been able to have as competitive a team around him as we would have liked.
Well, most teams put those 25 to 35 guys in uniforms in bigger markets. Great success off the field last year. Brewers drew over 3 million in a market of under 2 million people. Incredible. Your local TV ratings went up 63%. How do you maintain that growth this year?
Well, we just had our fan event in Milwaukee. We had a record number of people coming, and one of the ways we do it is by always bringing a team to the start of the season that can have the hope that it can make the playoffs. And once you make the playoffs, anything can happen. We bring our 5 starters back. We're bringing our bullpen back, and while we lost Prince, we've added Aramis Ramirez. So the same team that won 96 games last year will be on the field this year.
Editorial comment from me, most important, people do feel your passion. I know it. In a very tough situation this year, though, this winter with Ryan Braun, he's appealing the results of a test for banned substances. You made a statement about supporting the principle of drug testing while also standing firmly behind Ryan as a person. Is baseball entering a new era where the game can take action on performance-enhancing drugs without demonizing the individual players?
Well, the important thing I think is that baseball's entered an era where, the drug testing is working. And so even if it's an MVP player like Ryan, they're not immune to the test. That being said, the test and the process has to run its course. And unfortunately, this process is running its course somewhat in a microscope in the public eye. And we don't yet have the results of Howard Ryan's hearing came out, in which he was able to present his side of the story, which, from what I understand I do not know the details. I'm as much in the dark as any of our fans.
Well, one other notable piece of off-season news, Mark, the owners voted to extend Commissioner Bud Selig's contract. How has he gone from being perhaps the most embattled commissioner in sports to one of the most secure?
Well, I think that starts with the terrific job he's done at Major League Baseball. If you look at, really record revenues that we have across the sport, record franchise price sales. We're looking at a case with the Dodgers now where every day it seems like the imputed price goes up $100 million. And likewise, parity in the sport where, last year, the last day of the season, I think 14 to 16 of the 30 teams were in games that to game 162 counted for how it was going to affect their playoff stature, whether they made the playoffs or how they would get seeded in the playoffs. So he's just done an outstanding job across the board. And what isn't seen in the public eye is the outstanding job he does communicating with owners. Having been an owner himself, he's extremely helpful to all of us. When I have challenges, especially since he ran the Milwaukee franchise, he's been very helpful to me to call and bounce things off of. So outstanding communication among owners and outstanding record on and off the field for the commissioner. And frankly, I think he was ready to retire Commissioner Selig, and the owners really kind of asked him to stay on for another few years because it's hard to see life in Major League Baseball without him.
Mark Adonasio, I'm coming to Miller Park this year. Thanks for joining us on Sportfolio.
Well, we look forward to having you, Rick, and we'll try not to put you. We've got seats. Bob Euchre's our Hall of Fame announcer. We've got seats up in the upper deck behind one of the stanchions. You can't really see that well, but they're only $1, and we'll try not to put you in those seats.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, looks like I'll be in the front row. Mark Adonasio bought the Brewers for $223 million in 2005, and the Angels signed one player, Albert Pujols, for over $250 million this winter, and it may have been a bargain. Later in the show, Darryl Hamilton and Seth Everett will debate the worst deals and the biggest free agent steals in the offseason. And coming up, the bidding on the bankrupt LA Dodgers could reach $1.5 billion. We'll bring in sports lawyer and Wharton professor Ken Shropshire to tell us if it all adds up. Baseball talk continues when we return on Sportfolio. Welcome back to Sportfolio. And it's been a tumultuous winter for two of Major League Baseball's flagship franchises. The Blackstone Group is taking bids from prospective owners in a court-supervised sale of the bankrupt Los Angeles Dodgers. And the New York Mets are trying to sell minority ownership shares to raise cash to clear debt and pay their legal bills. And here to discuss where these teams stand legally and financially is Kenneth Shropshire, noted sports attorney, author, and professor at the Wharton School of Business. Hey, Ken, let's start with the Dodgers' second round of bids expected to be reviewed by the end of the month. Some pretty big names, Mark Cuban and others, already out of the bidding. Is the process about to start moving a little faster?
Oh, definitely. They want to have this done April 1 in terms of choosing who the winner is and then close it out by the time you get to May. So it's coming up pretty fast. As soon as we start hearing a little bit more, next thing we know, the deal will be done.
With big-time dollars, people will move pretty fast to meet that deadline. But how much legal leeway will there be for baseball to approve the best bid, not just the highest bid? Obviously, McCourt wants the most money, but baseball doesn't want to get burned yet again.
We've still got a lot of moving parts, and certainly the personalities and backgrounds of prospective owners are going to be reviewed. And then you've got this issue of McCourt having debt and a court still having some oversight in terms of what deal is approved. So the amount of money is going to make a big difference, but MLB still has that little bit of power to say this is not an owner we want on our club, basically based on background.
Well, background, and obviously they do have the leverage, and there is that little matter, as you point out, of debt. Many are now predicting the sale price, though, will reach $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money, and could it go even higher?
I think it could, and I think you got the kind of truly analytical guys like Cuban who said I'm not going any further, and then probably about 1.2 or so. But this is what happens in all of America when there are mergers, acquisitions. People bid beyond whatever the actual value may be, and I think a lot of people are contemplating that the value of this franchise, especially because of the media rights, is a lot higher than we're hearing. So above 1.5 won't surprise me at all.
All right, let's leave the left coast and go to the other side of the country and talk about those Mets. They need to bring in minority partners, and in 2011, it looked like David Einhorn would buy in for about $200 million, but that did fall through. What do you think of their strategy to sell 10 shares at $20 million each?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're making a different kind of play as an investor there. You're really saying, I want to have the cachet of being known as an owner, but have none of the power. So if $20 million is the entry fee, some people are going to be willing to pay that. And there are others, sort of on a smaller version of what Einhorn anticipated, that will think this is a way in the door, and then maybe at some point I'll have a chance to get a bigger share. So it's a very different investment from looking at paying the $1.5 billion plus for the Dodgers.
Stephen A. Cohen, head of SAC Capital, reportedly has a commitment to buy a share, but he's also bidding to be majority owner of the Dodgers. Are the Mets at square one if he wins the L.A. sweepstakes?
Not really. I think he's hedging his bets, and I'm sure there's some kind of structure coming in place where if Cohen gets his interest in the Mets for $20 million, and he also gets the Dodgers, that they'll give him some time to pull out that interest in the Mets. I mean, obviously, you can't own an interest in both, but I think the MLB wants to make sure that the Mets are uplifted as much as they can be, and if that's the way it goes, that's the way it'll settle. But I think what's important here is, we don't know who's going to get the Dodgers, so to prevent Cohen from getting a little piece of the Mets that will have little in management impact is not going to be problematic in the short run.
And clearly, for the Mets, it's all about attracting limited partners with substantial means. Another interesting report, though, Ken, the Mets may try to sell 4 $10 million shares to their TV network SNY. They own 70% of it already. That would be kind of a clever way to get cash and retain control. But does it sound likely to you?
I think it's possible. I mean, it's very interesting to see how money is kind of moving around from one pocket to the other. I mean, it's certainly the case, for you and I, it's thinking about having set aside a college fund that we don't touch, but we use it to pay for our kids' college. It's really our money, but we tried not to touch it for anything else. So it's that kind of setup. It's their money. They retain ownership. They retain control. So it's a pretty savvy move, and it's certainly one that's important for them in terms of keeping the both investments in good shape.
Only Ken Shropshire would liken the purchase of the Mets to setting aside a college fund. But you're right. Predict for us, though, do the Mets reach their $200 million goal in this piecemeal fashion?
Well, everything I'm hearing seems like they will, that the 10 people with $20 million. And I think it's different kinds of characters than they originally anticipated. I mean, instead of thinking about kind of the wealthy individuals as doctors, lawyers at the higher end, it is going to be more of this combination of broadcast entities and prospective owners elsewhere. So some of the same names that we've seen in all these other deals are more likely to be the deals that will uplift the Mets and a different form of entry. We won't see Einhorn back in, but we'll see some other names we've seen before.
Kenneth Shropshire, thank you for bringing your knowledge and expertise to Sportfolio.
Thank you.
If you're keeping score at home, there are now 15 Major League teams conducting spring training in Arizona and 15 in Florida. And before we bring in Darryl Hamilton and Seth Everett to talk about the winter free agent market, see if you can handle the Sportfolio Stumper. What was the last big league team to maintain a Cactus League training camp outside either Florida or Arizona? Answer straight ahead on Sportfolio. Here's the answer to the Stumper. The last Major League Baseball team to hold spring training outside of Arizona or Florida was the Angels, who trained in Palm Springs, California from 1961 to 1993. We had Seth Everett and Darryl Hamilton on Sportfolio in November to predict the winter free agent market, and they got it right. Well, mostly right.
This is a guy who's probably going to be the highest priced player in the league after the start of the season next year, somewhere between 220 to 240 million.
I can't imagine any team that's going to be better suited for Prince Fielder than the Chicago Cubs. I think new GM Theo Epstein likes that mix, and I would not be surprised if Prince Fielder heads south from Milwaukee over to Chicago.
So, folks, Darryl Hamilton hit a home run with Albert Pujols, and we'll give Seth Everett's credit for a foul tip on Fielder. But they're still our go-to guys when it comes to the marketplace for baseball players. So, Seth, Darryl, want your opinion on what happened this offseason. Seth, you first. In your view, who was the most overpaid free agent?
Well, Prince Fielder got a lot of money from the Tigers, and if you had told me then that he would wear his father's uniform, I still wouldn't have believed you. So that's why I went with the Cubs. But I think the worst signing was C.J. Wilson. This is a guy general managers have told me a number of times is not a frontline starter. He's a middle rotation guy. They spent $75 million, the Angels did, and the only reason why it didn't get a lot of press was basically they signed Albert Pujols 12 hours beforehand. So all the hullabaloo about Pujols overshadowed what was a huge overexpenditure.
I truly believe that is correct, but I'm going to go with Aramis Ramirez for the Milwaukee Brewers. I think the simple fact that the Brewers lose Prince Fielder, so you sign a guy from the Cubs who has injury-prone and has not been really into the game the last couple of years. I don't think he's going to be able to pick up the pace that the Brewers are going to need those first couple months of the season. I just don't like this signing at all.
All right, guys, other direction, biggest bargains. Darryl, your pick?
I think the biggest bargain is Yu Jarvis. You know, with the Texas Rangers. I think the simple fact that the Rangers now open up the Far East, so to speak, and bring a guy over who has been a star over there, gets an opportunity to come over here now and be in the starting rotation. C.J. Wilson is gone, so I truly believe this is the #1 starter that the Rangers has always needed.
Hambone, they spent $100 million with the posting
True.
fee. That's
They'll
not
get
a
the money
bargain
back the first couple years.
Any means. What was a real bargain was the way they got their closer. Joe Nathan, who's been coming off injuries, signs a 2-year, $14 million deal. I love Joe Nathan. I think he's got great stuff. I hope that he recovers from the injury. But I have to believe that if they signed him, they had their doctors check him out. $14 million for a good closer, I thought that was the best bargain.
Hambone, we're getting familiar on Sportfolio, ladies and gentlemen. Overall, looking at the moves in the market, what team do you think spent their money most wisely? Seth, start with you.
Well, the team that spent the money the most wisely was I have to put a nickel in the jar. It's not the Florida Marlins anymore. It's the Miami Marlins. This is a team that has a new ballpark. They have a new manager. They tried to sign everybody. Look, they brought Pujols over. They brought this young Cuban kid, Cespedes. They tried to sign everybody, but what they did was they added Jose Reyes, and they get Josh Johnson back. That's a team who spent wisely over the offseason. They're going to be a very, very good team, probably contender in the National League East.
I like that pitch set, but I got to go with hard to believe the New York Yankees. I think the Yankees did a good job because the one thing the Yankees needed to rely on is starting pitching. What they do, they go out to Seattle and make a trade for Michael Pineda. They go out there and they get Kuroda from the Dodgers. Then they sign CC Sabathia. I think those 3 moves have made their rotation a lot stronger, and the fact that they're going to get rid of A.J. Burnett, just a matter of time. And looking at their offense, they're already solid, sure. I understand it's a year older with Jeter, with A-Rod, with Teixeira. But look, Curtis Granderson, who can argue should have been the MVP last year, he'll get a lot better. Plus, I think all in all, they'll be a better ball club going into the American League East this year.
They're 1,000 years old.
Yeah, but they're okay.
Listen.
They're going to be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine. We'll see what happens with those Yankees. But the other side of the coin, team that wasted its money in free agency, Hambone, who gets a booby prize.
This was a tough one. I mean, I like the Angels, but the fact that they spent $300 million on 2 players, I got a problem with that. They still have not really addressed their lineup from top to bottom. Sure, Pujols is in there, and he will do very well, but you're talking about a Pujols who's another year older, who's having who's all of a sudden become injury prone. Will he go back to the same player from a couple years ago? I don't know about that. And C.J. Wilson, I'm sorry, spending that kind of money on him, and he's not going to be your #1 starter anyway. I don't know if that was a good decision.
See, I love what the Angels did because they're going to get the money back on the Pujols contract in endorsements. But I will tell you the one thing going up the West Coast, the Seattle Mariners tried to do was the Mariners went into the offseason trying to tell people they were players. And what they did was they waited and waited and waited and tried to sign Prince Fielder. Prince Fielder, who never really wanted to play in Safeco Field. So what they basically did was they had a team that was in last place, last in the offseason, traded their #2 starter for a young should-be catcher, but now he's just going to be a DH in Jesus Montero, and they reduced their payroll by $15 million. I can't think of a reason to buy a ticket in Seattle.
All right, way enough on the Mariners, but here's something that people really ought to listen to because all the fantasy GMs out there are putting together their 2012 rosters. Darryl, who's the one guy you'd build your fantasy team around this season?
Strangely enough, I'm going with the Marlins. I mean the fact that Hanley Ramirez is coming back this season. I think he is the guy who's going to have a standout year. The fact that Jose Reyes is going to be at the top of that order, they're going into a new stadium. I honestly believe he'll realize as the season starts, playing third base will be a lot better position for him than shortstop. And I think his attitude will totally change once the fans start coming out and supporting that ball club. So I'm going to go with the Miami Marlins. Did I say that right? Ramirez.
Well, you don't have to put a nickel in the jar, but I will say this about Hanley Ramirez, and I'm not a big fantasy guy, but I saw Hanley Ramirez tell a number of reporters down south about how he didn't want to play third base. This is a guy who is a me-first guy, not necessarily embracing the team concept. To be honest with you, he could be a real trouble. I've been told by Marlins players in the past how bad he is in the clubhouse. I think the addition of Reyes actually hurts the Marlins, and I think that'll affect his fantasy numbers.
Darryl Hamilton, Seth Everett, no better 1-2 punch when it comes to evaluating baseball moves. Thanks for joining us.
You got it.
Up next on Sportfolio, some thoughts and some data on a phenomenon that no one saw coming. Linsanity rules when we return. Get Sportfolio wherever you go on the Bloomberg TV Plus app for iPad. You cannot afford to miss next week's show. NASCAR's Jeff Gordon one-on-one in time for Speed Weeks and NBA Commissioner David Stern on the eve of the All-Star Game. Join us on Sportfolio. If Commissioner Stern has an extra wide smile on his face when he sits down with us next week, we can give some credit to a young man named Jeremy Lin. A great story, undrafted kid from Harvard, the first American-born player of Chinese or Taiwanese descent to play in the league, bursts on the scene with a dazzling run of 20-point performances. And what a win Lin has been for the NBA and the Knicks. Since February 4th, his 17 Knicks jersey has been the league's top seller, and prices for Knicks tickets on the secondary market have jumped nearly 30%. The Knicks drew the largest crowd in 8 years to see a Timberwolves game at the Target Center, and Lin has gone from 190,000 followers to 875,000 on China's version of Twitter. This last item has to make David Stern especially happy. It gives him a new avenue to reach more than 300 million basketball fans in China. And the league's already been brand building aggressively in Asia, hosting a Chinese New Year celebration last month. And the NBA and AEG are partnering to develop arenas in several major Chinese cities. And just as Fernando Mania in the 1980s blazed a trail for baseball in the Hispanic market, Linsanity could be more than just a temporary condition, and the symptoms could spread far beyond Madison Square Garden. That's it for this edition of Sportfolio. Thanks to Mark Adanazio, Ken Shropshire, Seth Everett, Darryl Hamilton for joining us, and thank you for watching. I'm Rick Horrow. See you next time on Sportfolio.